Welcome everybody to Beacon Ridge Baptist Church. My name is Zach. I think I've met everybody here. Chris is out of town this week, so I'll be preaching to you. And we're going to be going out of Matthew 6. We're continuing our sermon series on the Sermon on the Mount. So if you'd like to turn there, I think it's going to be up here too. But we'll be in Matthew 6, starting in 25. Let me just read this section here so we know what we're talking about. Therefore, I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or stow away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Can one of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? And why do you worry about clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow. They don't labor and they don't spin, and yet not even Solomon, in all of his splendor, was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today, and tomorrow is thrown in the fire, will he not much more clothe you, you of little faith? So do not worry, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the pagans run after these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you as well. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has trouble enough of its own. This is a pretty well-known...
Sorry. I'm trying, I can't get your mind to work.
I'm sorry. Move it up a little
I
bit.
think it needs to come closer to you.
Yeah.
Right up there. Like sticking in your beard.
No. We'll see if I can get this. Is that better?
Actually, yeah.
Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Good. So we've just read this about worrying. It's a well-known passage about worry. I have a hard time accepting this just out of hand, though, just personally. Because I've found that worry, at least in some parts of my life, has been pretty helpful. As most of you know, I spent much of my life as an alcoholic. And when I was drinking, I had no worries. There was one thing I was concerned about every day, and that was how I was going to get drunk. But I was very good at that. So I really didn't have to worry about anything. It wasn't until I got sober that I started to worry about things, like, how am I going to stay sober? Who am I going to be around? And are they going to encourage that? I've wasted a lot of my life. How do I find a real job and a real career? Who am I going to marry? All these things became worries. And what they did was they helped keep me on that path in recovery. They helped prompt me, and it was something I think about every day. So worry has been pretty helpful for me so far. But as we've seen in the rest of the Sermon on the Mount, things aren't exactly necessarily what they seem to be when you first read it. If you go back to the Beatitudes and read about, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted, the Greek word there for blessed literally means happy. Happy are those who mourn, which is a direct contradiction and makes absolutely no sense. You can't have, that's why there's two separate words. You're not happy while you mourn. And what we've seen over the past several weeks is that what is being used here is a clever teaching tool, that you're taking these very nuanced and deep ideas and presenting them in ways that seem contradictory. So you have to look at it a certain way to really get what it's saying and understand the depth of what's being related. I think that's probably true here about worry. So, if only for my own sake, let's look at this again. I think the first thing to ask is, when Jesus says in 25, therefore I tell you, do not worry, what is he referring to with worry? If we look at the actual Greek word, which I believe is merisate, it comes from other words that mean to divide, to separate out. And it seems like when it's saying, do not be anxious, do not worry, there's this idea that you're taking your attention and separating out part of it. And you're holding on to something. You're preoccupied with it. You're obsessing over something. That full attention you have, you're taking some part of it and dedicating it to this one thing. It's a lot like when I was a little kid and my adult teeth were coming in, my baby teeth were starting to fall out. I would sit there, as soon as one got loose, I'd start wiggling at it. And it would hurt, and it tasted awful. It tasted like blood and, I don't know, something else. I'd sit there and ow! And then immediately go back and start wiggling again. Ow! Just over and over. And it hurt, I didn't like it, but I just kept going back to it. And my mother would tell me, stop worrying at that. Stop messing with it. Or if I ever got a cut, I would sit there and pick at it. My mom would say, stop worrying at that cut. It's never going to get better. If you just leave these things alone, they'll sort themselves out. You messing with it all the time is actually making it worse. And this is what it sounds like when Jesus is talking about worry. That you're worrying at something. Worrying at and thinking about something that either we cannot control, or obsessing about something and making it more important than it actually is. If you look at things, there's plenty of things in our lives we cannot control. Let me ask this. We do this in our recovery meetings every once in a while. What can you control in your life? What do you control? This is not a rhetorical question.
Your behavior.
My what?
Your behavior.
Your behavior? You're in complete control of that. Your parents and the way they raised you didn't have any influence on that. The people that you're around and the way they're behaving doesn't influence you in that. The way you think and whether you've eaten enough or gotten enough sleep doesn't change how you behave or react to your parents.
But we still have the control over the choice to have that, like to act on the behavior.
Okay, so we have control to some degree over behavior. I'll give you that. What else do we control?
I control my husband.
If anyone has met me, you know that is not true.
Yeah, I can't make that statement either. You can't even control my.
Not for lack of trying, but just don't work that way. Who else? What do you control?
I can control what color my toes are.
You can control what color your toes are. Okay.
What is it? What you control or what you think you control?
What you can control.
I feel like it's not.
Stuff.
Yeah. The conclusion you inevitably come to is that on the list of things we can control, it is depressingly short. And most of those things, like with your example, thank you for that, is there are other factors influencing it. I can control what I wear, but I can't control how I was raised or the laws against indecent exposure and such, so it limits down what my options are. So even when I think I have complete control over something, there's some limits there. What?
I say take the right turn,
Yeah.
hard right turn.
Exactly. There's a lot of things we cannot control. And as Jesus says here, what is the point in worrying about that? Ultimately, we cannot do anything about it. Additionally, we talk about blowing things out of proportion. When we start to worry about something, it grows in our mind. It becomes more important. If, because of my attitude, like you saw how I just spoke to my wife, I, several times in my life, have been concerned I'm going to be fired from my job. I probably deserved it. But that would start to grow in my mind, and I worry about it, and it become more and more important, and to the point where it becomes the one thing I'm focused on. So when we think about worry, I don't think that this is talking about genuine concerns you have that lead you to make good choices. With my daughter, I was very concerned I wouldn't be a good father. And that worry helped direct me into the right actions. But that worry wasn't all-consuming. It was a concern I had, I controlled what I could, I made the best choices I could, and gave it all to God. That is not what we're talking about here. On the other side of this, I also want to say, because those fears, those concerns we have can lead to good decisions, what Jesus is not saying is to act in reckless abandon. So if I were to walk out onto First Street there, cover my eyes, and run back and forth saying, I'm not worrying, God will take care of me, that's really not the kind of foolishness, the that we're talking about. That kind of foolishness does not honor God. If you don't believe me, read the book of Proverbs. So the worry we're talking about, I think, are things that we cannot control, things that blow things out of proportion. Which I have to say is kind of a tall order, because I find myself worrying about things all the time. My daughter right now is 21 years old. She goes to college down here at ACC. Every time she leaves her house, even if it's just going to class or getting her hair cut or something, I still worry. I'm still concerned. I've heard this sermon or sermons about this passage preached before. And the point that is made is that worry is an example of a lack of faith. Well, I think to some degree that is true. I notice in myself that's really not the case. I don't think. Because I trust in God. I know who God is. I've read a lot about God. But I still have concerns and have worries. So I think, at least for my sake, I'd like to look at an example. An example of someone who had a lot of things, very valid things, to be worried about and how they responded to it. And maybe that'll shed some light on this section of the New Testament. So we're going back to the Old Testament. If you have your Bible, we're going to the book of Habakkuk. Who here has ever read the book of Habakkuk? A little bit? You have? You have? Who here knows what the book of Habakkuk is about? Nah, figured. It's one of the minor prophets. The book is right between Nahum and Zephaniah, if that helps you at all. In my Bible, this is Matthew. If I turn back that far, I find the book of Habakkuk. It's on page 1474 if you have the right version of the Bible. So, the book of Habakkuk starts with a man named Habakkuk. If you've heard it pronounced differently by someone else, they were probably right. It's a strange name. To understand the situation, we need to go back even further. Further to the Exodus out of Egypt. God brought Israel out of Egypt, out of slavery. He brought them to Mount Sinai, and he established the covenant. He said, I am your God, you are my people. He made an agreement with them. He said, if you follow my law and worship me, these good things will happen. If you break our agreement and do not, these bad things will happen. He said, if you follow the law, are faithful to me, other nations will not invade. You'll have years of plenty. The rains will come on time. You'll not have to worry about disease or natural disasters. But if you deviate, you start following other gods or worshiping other gods or forget me, you'll start seeing things like other nations invading. You'll be subjected to them or destroyed. There'll be famines and plagues and all these terrible things. It was a way of installing physical consequences to the nation's attitude towards God. If bad things were happening, you would say, is this because we are leaving God and should we return? And if you know about the history of Israel, there was the one whole kingdom of all the tribes of Israel. If you have heard about guys like Saul or David or Solomon, they had this one full, very powerful, wealthy kingdom. After Solomon, there was civil unrest, and they split into two kingdoms. There's Israel, the kingdom of Israel on top, and the smaller kingdom of Judah in the south. A nation called Syria wiped out the northern kingdom. So by the time Habakkuk is writing, Israel is only one kingdom in the south called Judah. Much smaller, much weaker. They're being threatened by this empire of the time, this superpower called the nation of Babylon. And if you read the book of Kings, you see that there is a succession of very bad kings. As you read, it'll say, this guy with some strange name became king of Israel, and he did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And the next guy became king, and he did evil in the eyes of the Lord. There were some reformers, like Hezekiah and some others, but for the most part, you have this decline, this move away from God in their kings, in their leaders, in their priests. And so Habakkuk is writing at a time, he's a prophet, right towards the end of this. And he starts like this. He starts with a complaint. He says, "How long, Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Or cry out violence, and you do not save? Why do you make me look on injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Destruction and violence are before me, and there's strife and conflict that abounds. Therefore, the law is paralyzed, justice never prevails. Wicked hem in the righteous, and justice is perverted." It is a desperate time. Not only are other nations like Egypt and Babylon threatening this small kingdom of Judah, but even internally, their own people are exploiting them, are deviating from the law. They're committing acts and there's no justice for it. And people are asking Habakkuk, why is God letting this happen? And Habakkuk in turn is asking God, why are you letting this happen? And this is the answer. In 5, God answers, "Look at the nations and watch. Be utterly amazed, for I am going to do something in your days you would not believe even if you were told. I am raising up the Babylonians, a ruthless and impetuous people who will sweep across the whole earth, seize dwellings not their own. They are feared and dreaded people. They are a law unto themselves." Habakkuk says there's injustice, there's violence, all these things are happening, and God says, "Good news! I am sending the Babylonians to kill you all." This is very similar to if I cried out to God and said, "God, I have lost my job, a car is broken down, my wife and daughter are sick, I need your help." And God says, "Good news! I'm sending people to burn down your house too." Is this a real comforting response? No. This is horrifying. Evidently, Habakkuk agrees. In 12, he responds. He gives a second complaint. He says, "Lord, are you not from everlasting to everlasting? My God, my Holy One, you will never die. You, Lord, appointed these Babylonians to execute judgment, and you, my rock, have ordained them to punish. But your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrongdoing. Why do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent when the wicked swallow up those who are more righteous than themselves?" He goes on to talk about how these wicked people are exploiting the people of Israel and then worshiping their own power, worshiping their own money. And finally, Habakkuk ends his second complaint saying, "I will stand and watch and station myself on the ramparts. I will look to see what you say, and what answer I am to give to this complaint." Habakkuk didn't find that first answer very satisfying. And we can see here when he says, "What answer am I to give?" He's in the same position that a lot of pastors find themselves when people ask, "Why did this happen to me? Why did this happen to my child? Why did this happen to my family?" And we're in the unenviable position of having to say, "I don't know." God responds again. He says, "Write down this revelation and make it plain." We're in chapter 2. And he says, "See, the enemy is puffed up, and his desires are unrighteous, but the righteous person will live by faith. Indeed, wine betrays him, he is arrogant." And then God goes on to give these woes. Woes to the one who pile up stored goods. Woe to he who builds his house with unjust gain. Woe to he who builds his city on bloodshed. Woe to him who carves an idol. And in the second response, we see that God is not going to let the treachery, the unrighteousness, the evil that is going on in Judah to stand. He is going to address Habakkuk's complaint. But it's not the way Habakkuk expects or would like. What will happen, and if we read in Jeremiah and some of the later prophets, Babylon will come in and it will wipe out the nation of Judah. Destroy Jerusalem and God's temple. They will take people hostage, like we see in Daniel and Ezekiel. They will end this wickedness. The wickedness that is present in Judah will be punished, and it will be obvious that God has allowed this to happen. They have deviated from the covenant. The punishments that were laid out centuries before have been happening, and this final one, the most extreme one, is finally realized. And then, God is going to do something else. He's going to take the faithful who remain in Babylon. He's going to return them. The Old Testament continues in in some of the later books there. Was that?
Zephaniah?
Ezra and Nehemiah. In Ezra and Nehemiah, we hear about how the faithful remnant is returned to Judah. They rebuild Jerusalem. They rebuild the temple. They rededicate themselves to God. The wickedness and evil that is exhibited here is wiped out, and they restart. God restores them. The same cannot be said for the Babylonians. They seemed like an empire that would last through the ages, but within 100 years of Habakkuk writing this, they themselves are completely destroyed by the Persians. They suffer all of the woes God said they would. But his people, the ones who live by faith, are returned and restored. The evil that Habakkuk sees is addressed, it's judged, and it's eliminated. But if you have ever read the end of Jeremiah, or a really cheery book called Lamentations, you can see the process that took. It was horrifying. It was horrific. But it returned God's people to him. When I say that when I feel like I am worrying, it's not because I don't believe in God. It's not the case. It's because I've read books like this. And in my own life, I've seen what can happen to people. When I'm not here, I do a lot with recovery ministry, recovery from various forms of addiction. And I tell people, as soon as they're getting into recovery ministry as leader, I tell them, this ministry is going to chew you up. It's brutal. Because we have to sit there and watch as people who come in, who have been through some of the most horrifying things imaginable. And they continue to go through them. You see people who want to get sober, and they just can't, and they fall off. People who want to get away from drugs and alcohol, and they make it a little while, and they fail. Their marriages fall apart, even though they're trying, and they have to go through this recovery process alone. Some of them end their lives. It's a brutal ministry. And I sit there and I pray, and I ask God to help them, every single one that comes through that door, and a discouragingly few remain and stay in recovery. After seeing that, after reading things like this, it is easy to become cynical. It is easy to trust in God's power, easy to trust him as creator, easy to trust that he has a plan for all of history, and it is hard to accept that he is good. It's hard to accept that what he does is going to be good for me or for my family. And the temptation is to then take those things I can't control and say, I'm going to take care of this one myself. And when it comes to my wife or my daughter, I'm not sure I want to trust them to a God like this. It is not like a comfortable truth, but that is where I find myself. Seeing too many bad things after too many good people to not sit there and question, can I trust God? And so I obsess about little things that I try to control. I obsess about things I cannot control because fundamentally I doubt God's goodness. If anyone had an excuse to doubt God's goodness, it was Habakkuk. Receiving the word that he was to pass on to his people, that this calamity is coming. This tragedy, this horrible thing is coming for us, and ultimately it'll be good. But it's going to result in famine and war and death and all these terrible things. So, that's the situation in which I find myself. Let's see how Habakkuk responds. In chapter 3. Lord, I have heard of your fame, and I stand in awe of your deeds. Repeat them in our day. In our time, make them known, and in your wrath, remember mercy. It goes on to describe God coming in his wrath, restoring justice, and just how it shakes the earth itself. And he picks up in 16. After hearing this and seeing God's wrath and his reality, Habakkuk says, I heard and my heart pounded. My lips quivered at the sound. Decay crept into my bones, and my legs trembled. Yet I will wait patiently on the day of calamity to come to the nation invading us. It is not that Habakkuk is not afraid. He's not worried. He uses some of the strongest language possible, saying the decay crept into my bones. My legs trembled at what you are telling me, God. But his response is not like me, where I start to doubt. He says, I trust. I will wait patiently on this day of calamity to come for those who are invading us. His trust is still firmly set on God and what God has told him. But that's not all. Habakkuk goes on. There's another section here at the end of 16, or at 17. Though the fig tree doesn't bud, and there's no grape on the vine, and the olive crop fails, though the fields produce no food, and there's no sheep and no cattle in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord, and I will be joyful in God my Savior. He goes on to say, you can split this into two things. He mentions figs, grapes, and olives. Figs were just about the sweetest thing available in Israel at this time. Grapes, what are grapes used for? Wine. Olives for olive oil. This is part of the wealth of Israel, and it is common comforts. They're not necessary to live, but they make it a lot better. He says, if these things are taken away, I will still rejoice and be joyful. But he goes on further. He says, if there's no food, there's no sheep, there's no cattle, I will rejoice in the Lord. Even if there's famine, there is no wheat, there's no animals for food, there's no grain, and there's no meat. And at this time in Israel, there wasn't a lot else to eat. They didn't have real diverse diets. He says, still, he is dedicated. In spite of this, I will rejoice in the Lord and be joyful in God my Savior. Habakkuk will continue to live in joy and to worship God in spite of whatever is coming. And for what God said, it's not going to be fun. He closes here by saying, the sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like a deer, and he enables me to tread on the heights. God is the one who will carry me through this. He will give me the strength to, not just to the point where I survive, but he uses this image of a deer hopping on the heights, on these really difficult and dangerous slopes. God preserves them, and he's going to preserve Habakkuk too. Habakkuk commits to what God has already told him. He commits to continue to find joy in his worship in God, and he knows that God will strengthen him, whatever is coming, that he cannot control. This is a really profound statement of faith, especially given the circumstances that are described in the message that he received. So let's go back to Matthew. Now we've seen this example, seen Habakkuk and how he responds. Let's go back to Matthew and read about worry. So back in Matthew 6:25. Therefore, do not worry about your life, what you eat or drink, or your body what you wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothes? That question there is important. That one. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothes? It's not really a question. This is a question in the way that, like, if you were trying to steal cookies out of the cookie jar when you were a little kid, and your mom came in and said, are you supposed to be doing that? That wasn't a question. When I did that, my mother was not inviting a philosophical debate about the ethics of my actions. She was telling me, you're not supposed to do that. And we both knew it. This is similar. The way it's constructed in Greek prompts another question. The expectation is that you're going to read that and say, oh yeah, life is more than food. It is more than clothes. That's the way it's built. So if that's the question, life is more than food and is more than clothes, we know that that's not what life is, then what is it? What is the purpose of life if it's not just survival? If it's not just enjoyment? If it's not just the pleasure we find in this? Again, this is not rhetorical. What is the purpose of our lives? Seems like that's important to know before we go any further.
To serve God.
To serve God? Okay. Anyone else?
To find out God's plan for us.
Find out God's plan for us? That's, yeah, sure. Anyone else? Since Chris isn't here, I'll quote Dallas Willard. To know God and enjoy him forever. To love God and to love other people. To know Jesus Christ and continue his ministry on the earth until he returns. All of these things, you could make a decent argument saying That's what it is. All of them are an expression of one thing, and that is the worship of God. Worship is not just the songs we sing up here. Worship is living in a way that recognizes who God is and who we are in relationship to Him. Whether that is at work, whether it's how you raise your kids, whether that's how you pay your taxes. All of those become acts of worship when they live out that truth, who God is and who I am in relationship to Him. That is the point. All of creation is designed to worship God. Not because He needs it, it's more because He should receive that. God's glory and His worthiness to be worshipped is not so much a matter of ego, as some people say. It is more like a natural law, like gravity or thermodynamics, all the laws of thermodynamics. They simply are. God, in and of Himself, is worthy of worship and glory. Or glorification, sorry. So because that is the purpose here, life is much more than just eating, just surviving. All of these necessities lead to that higher purpose, that higher meaning. So if we think about worry, like I said before, worry coming from a root word meaning to separate or divide. I have my eyes set on worshiping God, living out that purpose, but when I am concerned about things I cannot control, or when I focus on something so much it becomes much worse than it is, I'm dividing that attention away from God, away from the meaning of my life. I'm splitting off sections and slivers of what should be dedicated to this ultimate meaning and purpose, and assigning it to things I cannot control or are not as important. Worry in this fashion really hinders us. It's like me picking at those scabs. It's only going to hurt you. It is an obsession with or preoccupation with something that not only is fruitless and futile, it also hinders and prevents me from worshiping God and living out what my life is supposed to be. There are valid concerns, like I said, and they fall on a hierarchy of meaning. Food, clothing, they're pretty important. But they're not as important as pursuing God, His kingdom, and His righteousness. In fact, with this section, Jesus expands upon how God cares for animals and for the birds, how God cares for the lilies of the valley. But with this statement, you can start off on that first line, therefore I tell you not to worry about your life, what you eat, what you drink, about your body, what you wear. And you can pair that up with 33. But seek first the kingdom of heaven and its righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. You can take that as one statement. Do not worry about these things. Seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness. It's an easy thing to talk about, but it is still difficult. Like I said, when my daughter goes out that door, I still worry about her. I can't do anything. In fact, one of the most terrifying experiences of my life was when I became a parent and I realized how little control I had as a parent. You're going to learn about this soon. It's horrifying. When I was a kid and when I wasn't a parent, I thought that parents basically were these kind of despots. They were these, you had complete control over your child's life and what they were doing and all this stuff. And when I became a parent, I realized it was all a lie. You have basically no control. I thought that came when they were like teenagers. No, it starts right from day one. It is horrifying. Because you're responsible for and love this person so much, and there's so little you can really do for them. It's hard not to fall into that. It's very difficult to act like Abraham and take the things we are concerned about or preoccupied with and let go of that control and place them firmly in God's hands, knowing that He is able to do a lot more than we can, but still fearing what He might end up doing. Looking at this, our response to worry should mirror what we see in Habakkuk. Habakkuk does not just recognize God as Adonai, the Lord of all, the guy who guides all of history and manages the nations and all that. He's not just God, Pantocrator, the one who created all things and therefore is in charge of them, but recognizing him as Yahweh, as the God who is personally interested with us, who cares about the birds and make sure they're fed, who knows when a sparrow falls from the sky. Jesus, who fell on his knees weeping outside Jerusalem, saying, Jerusalem, I wished for so long to gather you all under my wings, just like a mother hen. To not just believe in God's power and his reality and who he is in the Old Testament and his wrath and all that, but to understand and know his goodness as well. It is the trust and understanding, not just in God, but in his goodness, that helps us understand how we can let go of worrying about these things. A quick story, just to try to bring some of this rambling into focus. Like I said before, I work in a recovery ministry. I had a young guy come in 4 years ago, something like that. This kid had a childhood you wouldn't wish on the person you hated the most in the world. It's one of the most horrifying stories I ever heard. He was about 20 years old, alcoholic, just having a really hard time. And bizarrely, he and I, our experiences and what we liked and the way we talked lined up perfectly. And me and all the other leaders in this ministry said, you know what, I'm probably the best person to talk to him. I'm going to be able to get through to him in ways other people can't. So I started investing in this kid. Spent hours every week trying to help him understand not just recovery, but just the Bible in general. He knew nothing about Christianity, about the Bible, about not being an alcoholic. He didn't know anything. And I kept talking to him, kept going over this. I spent like a year and a half investing in this kid. He attempted to kill himself 3 times in that year and a half. And the entire time, things just kept getting worse. So by the time I was towards the end, I had run up right against the boundaries of what I could safely do in recovery without becoming over-invested or doing too much. I've been praying for this kid daily, at least daily, for a year and a half. And things it wasn't even like things weren't getting better. They were getting much worse. I could see what was going to happen, and I was terrified about it. I was constantly racking my mind about what can I do? What else can I say? What is the magic words that are going to unlock something in his head? What can I do? I was worrying at it. I was just preoccupied with it. It was the thing that was always on my mind. And I was praying to God one day about this kid, and things were getting really dire. And the thing that God told me was, you're going to have to let him go. Which I immediately rejected. I said, no, I can figure something out. I can do something. There's something I can figure out with this. What God showed me was I was obsessing about something I couldn't control. Whatever he was going to do, he was going to do. The only person who could help him was God. At this point, I had run out of room. I could do nothing more. And I was obsessing about this, and it was becoming this huge thing in my life. It was pushing out what it says here, seeking the kingdom, seeking its righteousness. And it was all dedicated to this one problem. And so I had to take a step back and say, okay, God is going to do what he's going to do. Which was horrifying. It was a life and death situation. It came to the point where this young man called me. He said he was planning on hurting himself. He was homeless at this point. We had to run around and find him. We finally did find him. The people I was with, who were part of the ministry, were trying to cajole him and guilt trip him and trying to get him to come out. I let him go for a little while. I finally told him to stop. And I did one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, and told this 20-year-old kid, you are either going to get sober, you're going to choose right now to get sober, to go to this halfway house in this ministry, and you're going to get better. Or you are going to kill yourself. Either way, you're going to give me a yes or no answer right now. You'll get better, or no, I won't. And I'm going to leave you here, and you're going to do whatever you're going to do. I'm done. I can't help you anymore. And he tried to get me to talk to him, tried to get me. I said, no, I said, everything I can. This is the choice. Make it now. And he very reluctantly decided to pursue this halfway house. And I continued to call him every week, and nothing was getting better. He was pretty much in the same state. I was pretty much talking him out of killing himself every week. This went on for months. And then over the course of about 2 weeks, he became a completely different person. I talked to him, and he was telling me about what he had heard in this Bible study. He was telling me about how God had been doing these things. It was no longer talking about hurting himself, destroying his life. It was talking about what God had for him and what God wanted in his life. And this kid didn't even really realize it, was the funny part. And he can't point to a time when God changed him. But there was a point, weeks after this, when I had been taken out of the picture and I had nothing to do with it, that God reached down and grabbed this kid by the scruff of the neck and dragged him into the kingdom of heaven. And it had nothing to do with me. It was very clear. I had done everything I could. I had to give up. It took months, and then in God's time, he delivered him. The only thing that was up to me was to be faithful, to not worry about what God was going to do, to trust in God's goodness in spite of the circumstances, even though it looked like it would never work out, to trust in God's goodness and what he had, to give up on my worry and what I could do. And ultimately, it was what was best for this kid. It still terrifies me to think about that decision. And band, if you'd like to come up for the last song, go ahead. It still terrifies me to think about having to do that. But ultimately, it was what was right. It was what was good. That my trying to control what was happening, my desires, nothing I did really did anything. And ultimately, I had to resign myself to the fact that God is good. He cared about this marginalized, tossed away kid with the worst life you can imagine enough to take time out of his day to save him. And that is everything my faith is predicated on, is on the goodness of a God who's willing to do that.